Counter-Narrative News bringing you daily news today on Thursday, 9th of February 2023. Leader of Ukraine, Zelensky, is currently on a visit to London. Some interesting comments were made. Now, if you look at the spectacle of Zelensky speaking in Westminster Abbey in the Houses of Parliament to the members of the House of Lords and Commons, it's an interesting moment whereby basically the political class of Britain can posture like they have some moral high ground on anything when everything else in the country is falling apart in capitalist and far-right Tory government-induced crises all over the place, be it the strikes by the public sector, the impoverishment of the people around the cost of living crisis, the scandals of the racist attempts at policy making around the small boats posture, the Rwanda policy, the ongoing fallout from Brexit and the racism around that, Windrush, Grenfell. It's just the crises, the ongoing deepening crisis in the royal family with Prince Andrew as a known sexual abuser of girls. It just goes on and on. So here you have Zelensky as a cause célèbre for otherwise people involved in all kinds of attacks on the powerless. So Zelensky makes his speech at the Houses of Parliament and he argues that basically the fall of the Soviet Union was some kind of freedom for Ukraine and that the evil Soviet Union lost. Well, on this count, he's in agreement with Vladimir Putin, who he is contending with, as Putin is leading the Russian state in invading, occupying, collective punishment against civilians, and annexing the country which Zelensky is the formal leader of. So that's an interesting nuance to the whole posture. And then you can see this as aforementioned, the drama and theatre whereby the political class, the members of parliament and the members of the Lords are posturing like they are saving the great cause of today. And it's worth reflecting upon. This is the same state and political class which has done exactly what Vladimir Putin has done to Ukraine in their behavior in relation to countries like Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, Iraq twice in conducting horrific conflicts against those people in that nation, Libya, and other countries historically. So there is no moral high ground, however much these opportunists would like to posture. Zelensky wants Russia to lose, which is understandable. His country is under attack and occupation by them. However, it's not clear that the West is supporting Kiev in the defense of Ukraine. In one sense, the West does want Russia to lose in Ukraine, but that doesn't mean the West wants to actually defend Ukraine with the capacity to actually free itself from the Russian occupation and attempts at annexation. The West wants and is successful in using Ukraine to bog down Russia historically into a conflict that helps to remove Russia and to drastically reduce its capacity as a competing pole in the global colonial capitalist competition which is going on by the West on the one hand and emerging poles which are not presenting a counter, a economic, political, or even cultural counter-opposition to the Western order. They want a piece of pie off the global Western order, and that's what the West's problem is in this regards. Zelensky also says in his speech, he says that once Ukraine has become victorious and freed itself, that no nation would ever dare to bully another nation and defy the international order of respecting sovereignty of nations at the United Nations. But that's not true at all, because Britain is still supporting other countries that's involved in colonial annexation, not least Tel Aviv in relation to the Palestinians. And it's already been mentioned about their behavior towards other countries. Now, what makes Russia slightly different, but different to Western induced conflicts, but similar to Israel, is annexation. Hitler annexed territory in his quest for Lebensraum, living space. Israel annexes territories, illegal settlements which are built in the West Bank. But that's not something which Britain and US has done in its conflicts that it's imposed upon Afghanistan and Iraq, which is just an interesting detail. And then you have the spectacle in the southwest of England of British far-right Prime Minister Rishi Sunak standing in front of a tank with Zelensky. And then Sunak suggests that, quote-unquote, nothing is off the table in terms of its military support to Kiev. But that's not true at all. Everyone knows that the West is just refusing to give the type of military support to Ukraine to defeat the Russians. The Russians remain 6-7 plus times greater in its military capacity than the Ukrainian forces. Now, why is it the West does not want to arm and back Ukraine sufficiently in this regards? But before one answers that, it has to be made clear, we're not arguing that this should happen. We are just identifying what's happening and why. So it's not a case that NATO should get in deeper into Ukraine, although it still remains the case that Ukraine has a legitimate case in terms of the United Nations and international law and principles of independence and sovereignty. It has absolute moral high ground in its project, but it's made so complicated by the machinations of Western imperialism as we've been exploring. Now, Sunak says nothing is off the table, but it clearly is. Nothing is forthcoming in the type of support that Zelensky and Kiev are demanding. So all of these things have to be explained clearly for people to understand as objectively as possible in the interests of the concepts of self-determination and independence vis-a-vis aggression, particularly by much larger and superpower states, as in the case of the West and as in the case of Moscow. Going over to West Africa and Mali and the Sahel region, Lavrov's, the foreign minister of Russia's visit there, raises another very interesting and deeply concerning issue. The Malian authorities are arresting and jailing individuals who have expressed public differences and criticisms of Mali's alliances with Moscow. They have been criminalized and put into jail because it's been claimed by the Malian regime that they are somehow unpatriotic in making these comments. This raises another whole dimension of problematics in relation to the white nationalist regime of Russia penetrating deeply further into Africa, mainly by means of their racist white racist death squad, the Wagner Group. A country that has a military junta or military coup can then try to posture like it's doing something new and for the benefit of the nation, so-called, by shifting away from Western alliances to an Eastern one in the form of Moscow. But this is not bringing any benefits to the people at the grassroots. There's no redistribution in a just way towards the poorer classes in terms of economy and politics. That's not the case. However, they can instrumentalize this shifting alliance to further repress the people and continue with the same economic model of exploitation of labor and land and mineral resources. There's a lot of really deeply critical questions that need to be raised in exploring all of these things, again in the interests of the oppressed classes, the pressure being released from them and them having any chance of a better existence. The struggle against violent extremism in Mali or Burkina Faso or anywhere in the global south is a very complicated affair which cannot be answered by a much more militarily aggressive and repressive and violent approach. Killing more civilians as you're trying to kill the so-called terrorists is only going to breed some of the main reasons why poor people are recruited by these supremacist death squads stroke so-called terrorists in the first place. A few comments on Palestine. A raid by the Israeli army in its colonizing mission in colonized Palestine West Bank has resulted in the death of a 17-year-old in Nablus in the last 48 hours. A young 17-year-old called Hamza Amjad al-Ashkar was shot in the face by the Israeli army. Tel Aviv claims he was an armed combatant. None of the armed factions in Nablus, which is called the alliance of which is called the Lion's Den, or anyone else in terms of the armed revolutionary Palestinian group or Palestinian liberation organization that's armed, has claimed Ashkar. And also the fact that a colonizing army is raiding a colonized and occupied town and then blaming a young person for shooting back against that army's encroachment is frankly quite deeply problematic, and arguably Tel Aviv has no real grounds to justify its actions. On the 27th of January, 7 Israelis were killed in an attack by a Palestinian outside a synagogue in Jerusalem. This nearly immediately followed that Tel Aviv had killed 10 people in the Jenin refugee camp. So you can see this, what the Palestinian ambassador to Britain, Hussam Zomlot, calls the cycle of violence. That the onus, this is including in international law, but the political onus and the moral obligation is on the colonizing, occupying power to retreat. And if it doesn't retreat by means of pressure of member states at the United Nations and regional and international multilateral bodies, then the Palestinians do have an international right to also fight back an illegal occupation and apply that pressure in a situation where the pressure is not applied by any other means. Finally, on this day, that's February the 9th in 1995, the Mexican government cancels its peace process with the Zapatista movement, or the National Army of Liberation of Zapata, the EZLN, and invades the territory in which they had influence in Chiapas. The EZLN came to be known when it occupied a regional town in Chiapas in January 1994. It was welcomed by a lot of leftist forces by being a new form of movement and struggle. However, there's some issues around that. Nevertheless, it remains a movement of the poor peasantry of that area for their rights, and in that framework, it is a just struggle. Many thanks for listening to Counter Narrative News. We do hope you appreciate our commentary and daily service. Please continue to support us by encouraging your friends and contacts to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also follow us on Twitter at counter_CNN. We wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.